In this video, we're going to explore the difference between relevant and irrelevant costs and which costs should or shouldn't be included in the calculation of deciding between one alternative and another. Very similar problem to one of your problem set problems. In this problem, Bill just returned home from a hunting trip and he brought home 8 ducks. On the other hand, Bill's friend John doesn't like Bill hunting and he wants to discourage him from further hunting. So, as part of that, he prepared an analysis of what he believes to be the estimate of a cost per duck. Now, the top part of the analysis is what he estimates the cost per a hunting trip to be, and that's $327. Then he divided it by the 8 ducks that Bill just brought home, and we'll assume that's pretty typical of what happens. And he prepared and said, it costs you about $41 per duck. Now, our assumption here, even though they don't say it, is that Bill's not a wealthy person, so John's agenda here is to show a really high number, which he did accomplish that, to dissuade Bill of hunting in the future. The problem is, though, that some of the costs that John included in his analysis were irrelevant, meaning we shouldn't have included them in the calculation. So he mixed up some relevant and irrelevant costs. So we're going to go ahead and redo part of this analysis, and let's take a look at requirement 1. It says, assume the duck hunting trip Bill just completed is typical. What costs are relevant as to a decision of whether or not Bill should go duck hunting again this season? So I do want to clarify because this may not be 100% clear. What this is asking is, what is the cost of making another trip this season? So it's not necessarily saying just stopping duck hunting altogether, because our calculation would be a bit different, but it's saying what is the true cost, true relevant cost of making another trip this season. So let's go ahead and work through one by one, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my highlighter here so that when we identify one of these costs as relevant, we can go ahead and highlight it. So I'll start out with the first item that John included, and it's the camper and equipment. Originally, the camper cost $19,000. Now again, keep in mind the cost on the right was the cost per trip at which John identified. How do we go from $19,000 to $170? Well, he divided the $19,000 by the number of trips that he estimated Bill would take over the life of that camper. It's usable for 8 seasons. He estimates that Bill usually does 4 duck hunting trips per season. 14 times 8 divided by 19,000, and that's how he came up with $170. The problem is that the camper and equipment, it'd be considered to be a sunk cost. It's irrelevant. It should not have been included in the calculation. Because the reality is, whether or not Bill makes another trip this season, he's still going to have the camper. That's something he paid for in the past, so it shouldn't be used in deciding whether or not to make an additional trip this season. So we're going to ignore that. Next, we have the travel expense for Bill's pickup truck. So he mentioned that, it's about 100 miles, I guess, round trip at 38 cents per mile. And how John came up with that calculation is 26 cents of it was for gas, oil, and wear and tear on the tires. And an additional 12 cents of that 38 cents was for depreciation and insurance. The problem here, though, is that some of these costs are relevant and some of them are irrelevant. The gas, oil, and tires, so I'll go ahead and highlight this here, is relevant because obviously if, Bill doesn't make the trip and the vehicle sits in Bill's, driveway or garage, then we're not going to have that extra 26 cents per mile. So that would be relevant. The depreciation and insurance on Bill's pickup truck is irrelevant. Whether or not he makes the trip or, again, his vehicle just sits there, he's going to pay insurance on it and it's going to continue to depreciate. So here, John had come up with 38 cents per trip based upon adding these two numbers together, multiplying times 100 miles, and we're going to change his analysis a little bit and say only the 26 cents is relevant times round trip 100 miles. So really the relevant cost would be 26 cents. Let's continue to look through here. The shotgun shells, 2 boxes per hunting trip, $40. Absolutely relevant. If Bill doesn't make a trip, he's not going to need the shotgun shells, so definitely we want to include those. Bill's boat originally cost him $2,800, usable for 8 seasons, 14 hunting trips per season. This is pretty much the same scenario as the camper that we look at the boat. This is actually going to be considered to be a sunk cost because no matter whether or not that Bill makes another trip, an additional trip that season, he's still going to have that boat. He already paid for it. The hunting license, the cost is $40 per season, and again, averaging 14 hunting trips per season. So how John got his $3 is he said $40 for the season divided by 14. That would be an average of $3 per trip. Now, again, we're not saying quitting hunting altogether, and we've already started the year and he already bought the hunting license. So because of that fact, and we're not talking about a future year, this is irrelevant. He already bought the license, he already paid the $40. It can also be considered to be sunk. Money lost playing poker. Loss of $36. Apparently, Bill's not a very good poker player. They add a little note here, though, and they say that Bill plays poker every weekend, regardless of whether or not he goes hunting or stays at home. Because we added that into the scenario, the $36 would be irrelevant. Now, if he only played poker when he went fishing, or excuse me, duck hunting, then absolutely we would have included it and it would have been relevant. But because he does it irrespective, it's irrelevant. The cost of whiskey, $15 per hunting trip, used to ward off the cold. So this is something. Apparently, Bill's not drinking whiskey at home if he's just staying home. So the cost of the bottle of whiskey would be relevant. So let's go ahead and highlight there. So you can see a number of different items that John incorrectly included if we were trying to come up with the additional cost for another hunting trip. Let me get rid of my highlighter real quick here. Okay, so let's go ahead and add these up. So the true cost of making an additional trip this particular season is $26 plus $40 plus $15 is $81. So that's still, from my perspective, still a decent amount of money, but far less than John's original analysis. But this only includes the relevant costs. So let's go ahead and look at part number 2. And I just left here on the bottom the relevant costs from number 1. So number 2 says, suppose Bill gets really lucky on his next hunting trip. So John hasn't dissuaded him and he shoots 14 ducks. So instead of 8, 14 ducks using the same amount of shotgun shells he used on his previous hunting trip to bag 8 ducks. How much would it have cost him to shoot those last 6 ducks? So you might have been swayed to take this $81 divided by 8 because that was the number of ducks initially. And you might have been swayed to divide that into it and to get a cost per duck and then multiply it times the 6 additional ducks. That might have been the avenue that you went. But the true answer to this is it's 0 additional dollars. The cost of a trip is $81. If we're saying that he doesn't use additional shotgun shells irrespective of the number of ducks that he shoots, the cost, this isn't a cost per duck, this was a cost per trip. There's no additional cost. The total cost of the trip is still $81. Again, whether or not he does 8 ducks, 6 ducks, 14 ducks, or 20 ducks, that is the cost of a trip.